Good evening and welcome, Winchester. Welcome to Visual Radio. Tonight my guest is Stephen Wade, author of The Beautiful Music All Around Us, Field Recordings and the American Experience. So why don't we give a call to Stephen Wade. See if I can read my own handwriting. I can.
Hello?
Stephen Wade.
Yeah, hi.
How are you?
Fine, Joe. How are you doing?
Good. You were out walking, huh?
Yeah, I have to. I do it every day.
Is there a lake around there?
No, there's just houses. But, you know, solvitur ambulatory, thinking while you walk. So it helps. It helps me.
Are you working on another book right now? We'll get right to that.
Well, I actually have one in mind. I'm not working on it right now because mostly what I've been working on is with relation to this, in relation to this book. But I do have a new one in mind ahead, and I know that someday this book will not be a new book, and it'll be time to go do another book. And I do have a lot of thoughts on that one.
I just figured since you were walking, you might have been thinking about your next book, you know?
Well, sometimes I do. That's sort of inevitable, but sometimes I'm actually not thinking about stuff like that. But anyway.
Hey, did you make it to Berkeley College?
I did, and it was absolutely wonderful. They kept me really busy, so I couldn't see you then, and I apologize for that. But those students, they're just wonderful players, and I was glad to contribute however I could. Really gifted musicians, every single one, and and it was very interesting to me to be in that setting because of their American Roots program that they've got going.
Now I'm talking to you in Maryland, right?
Yes.
So you were up here and there are a lot of gifted musicians in Boston. Did you talk to them specifically about Americana or the kinds of music, the field recordings that you covered in your book?
Well, the answer to all of that is yes. I dealt with them with respect to the banjo. I certainly addressed the large portion about the research behind my book and the work I did, and in individual tutorials, inevitably, some of that work, plus my own experiences as a musician and learning from older generation players, was always a part of those conversations. And since those points converge in my life as a player and as a historian both, they just, I can't escape them. And so conversations, pertain to them.
Now, today is Ella Fitzgerald's 96th birthday. She would have been 96 today.
Yeah, I knew her bass player a little bit, Keeter Betts. He lived here in Washington, and he was a wonderful guy. I actually talked to him at one point when I was doing some research on the string bass and its evolution, which in fact helped inform. He didn't appear in the final draft, but actually what he had talked to me about helped me understand the washtub or lard can bass, that's chapter 5 in the book where Bobby Hebb appears. I mean, so all these lines do continue to converge.
You know, I interviewed Fritz Richmond before he passed on.
Good, yeah. Well, he live in Boston, Cambridge. He's certainly part of that the Cambridge music scene.
I think Fritz was here part of that, but he was with John Sebastian at Passim.
Yeah, I played there. Yeah, that's right. That would have been a Club 47 back in the day with the Jim Kweskin Chug Band.
Right, and what it was, Sebastian played solo maybe 10 years ago, maybe 12, 14, and Fritz was kind enough to grant me an interview. Sebastian was very aloof and didn't want to talk on camera. Fine, whatever.
Whatever. I don't know.
I talked to Richie Havens about 10, 11 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And we just lost him this week.
I know. I saw him at Woodstock.
You were at Woodstock?
Yeah, 16 years old, yeah. Worked all summer in a record warehouse, earning the money to buy a youth fair ticket to get out from Chicago out to Syracuse and then on into that incredible traffic jam. There were 4 of us in a Mustang.
Oh, wow. I was 15, and I did not go. I knew about it. Wow.
I mean, I know it's a signal event, but it was really messy there in terms of weather, and it was uncomfortable for me, at least. I know that.
But
Richie Havens was wonderful. I mean, the first night was all acoustic music. I think that's why the last rock festival, as I understand it, where that happened. I mean, Joan Baez and Arlo and Ravi Shankar, and I think, and all kinds of Sweetwater. There was all kinds of acoustic acts the first night. The sound was good there, as I recall.
So, Stephen, you've been a musician and you've been writing. When did the genesis of the beautiful music all around us, when did the genesis for this book start?
Well, the genesis, in the sense of beginning, was when I was a teenager, and my teacher, Fleming Brown, who taught me the five-string banjo, said you have to listen to all these records, and they were hard to find. And so I'd go to the Chicago Public Library and listen to them there, and as rush hour buses lumbered past the plate glass windows, I'd be looking at names of people and places like Thaddeus Willingham from Gulfport, Mississippi, and Luther Strong from Dalesburg, Kentucky, all these wonderful, great litany of names and this music. And then in 1994 is actually when the project began, this project, and it first manifested itself as a CD that I put together, edited it, and produced, called A Treasury of Library of Congress Field Recordings, and that came out on Rounder in 1997. By then I was already signed with the Music and American Life series, University of Illinois Press. That had happened in 96. So the project really was 18 years between June 94 and September of 2012 when the book finally came out.
That's a long time. Now, Rounder Records is a hop, skip, and a jump from this studio.
I do know where they are. I'm not sure. I'm not surprised. I used to actually also work in North Woburn, Massachusetts myself.
You did, so you know this area.
Well, a little bit. I was a warehouseman. I worked there at a record warehouse there too, and yeah.
Oh, what record company? Was it a one-stop?
It was a distributor. It was a distributor that I worked for. I guess is that what you mean by a one-stop?
Yeah. What was their name?
Handelman Company, and then they serviced all the Kmarts and things like that all around. I don't think they're around anymore, but they were in a number of cities and stuff.
Stephen, it's like I don't think this generation understands the value of the vinyl record, even the CD and the one-stops and the distribution and the importance of it all. What an important process it was, because now just downloading something, it loses some of the magic. Well,
the context goes away because, in a sense, we're back to brown wax cylinders that you could cut away and then re-record on, like a CDR is today, and they didn't have notes. The role of the one-stop that you're describing, Joe, I understand what you're saying. I mean, there you had people going down, looking through a record rack with a clipboard, figuring, well, this needs to be replaced and that. There, at that company, it seems to me they were just entirely based on the Billboard listings of top songs. I don't think it was necessarily as intimate as certain local record stores are, where they're really figuring out local tastes. I know in the course of researching my book, I mentioned in the back of the book at one point in one of the endnotes, in the study of Ain't No Grab Can Hold My Body Down, and that wonderful song by Bosie Sturdivant, that I talked to a man who was a record distributor in Arkansas, right along the Mississippi River in Helena, Arkansas, and he had this in his place. He still had the music store. He and his father had this enormous cabinet, and I looked at it. There was 100, all these different shelves, all the same size. And in the course of talking with this wonderful man, he showed me that these are exactly the width of a 78 RPM record, and they would go. Their route men would go around to all these little restaurants, cafes, and taverns in the Delta, and they would they would stock the latest Muddy Waters or the latest Howlin' Wolf, because he realized, he told me that the Billboard really didn't apply to them, the national trends. What was important were the local ones, and the waitresses could tell them what the patrons liked, and they could see on the records themselves that had been whitened from use. The black, shellac had been worn away. Which records were getting played the most?
Oh yeah, I love it. You know,
they had to replace.
And the old jukeboxes, which Tommy James and the Shondells would have jukebox hits because they were on roulette, and that would help launch the songs into the top 40.
Oh, I understand. And in an earlier era before the 45, and in the 78 era, which this man was discussing there in Phillips County, Arkansas, you had this local hits that mattered, and the patrons' taste. You had sort of this combination of the local and the national. You had record companies creating these things maybe elsewhere, but then the local predilections were driving what was getting played. And that's what you had with race records and hillbilly records. They were marketed to specific markets, and foreign language records in the United States, certainly in the 20s and 30s. Hundreds, so tens of thousands of songs were recorded under these guises. It's specifically aimed towards, enclaves that would appreciate and embrace this music from their own backgrounds.
It's fascinating stuff, and now your book can at least transport someone into that world.
Oh, thank you.
The CD in the back of the book now, is that the specific CD you did with Rounder, or is it different?
Well, it's derived from it. On the Treasury that I did on Rounder's number 1500, I had 30 songs. These are 13 of those tracks, which I profile in depth in the book. So they're just a direct transfer that way.
And where did you master the CD? Did you master it twice, once for Rounder and then remaster it again?
No, it was a flat transfer for the book, exactly the same as what was on the Rounder thing. I did the mastering in Washington, D.C. here, which is, so the mastering was done in 97 at a studio here.
And I always like going in, you talked to my friend Bobby Hebb. As you probably have imagined, I've collected.
I'm sorry, I was interrupting you. What did you say?
You talked to my friend Bobby Hebb, and as you can probably imagine, I have collected, well over 100 different compilations with Sonny on it. So you can hear the different mastering, and it does affect the song tremendously. The reissue on Universal is Gavin Lersing and Heather Whitten, and it's crystal clear. But then I listened to a compilation on Night Train to Nashville, the Grammy-winning compilation from the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. And they have a bass-heavy mastering job. So there are distinct differences.
Is that the one with that deals with race? That particular record has a little booklet with it. Is that the one I'm thinking of? Because I think I have that.
It's a great record, and it won a Grammy for.
I know, I do have that. Yeah. Isn't that interesting how these things shift? Well, they do change from person to person, and mastering engineers play a role, and they hear things, and they may emphasize something that may be desired or not. You have these great specifics and this enormous body of comparisons that you can work with.
Well, the interesting thing about the new Sonny record is I was part of the whole process. Bobby and I were going to put out a deluxe Sonny back 10, 12 years ago. We were negotiating with Uni, and then we got a phone call from the West Coast. We were negotiating with the East Coast. And Heather Whitten called me. She said, my ex-boyfriend had Sonny. And she said, I love it, and I'm putting it out on Hippo. So we were involved with her in putting it out. And when it came in, and Bobby got his copy in Nashville, and I got my copy up here, he called me and he said, did they remix my record? And I said, Bobby, I thought they did, and I listened again, and they just remastered it. In spectacular fashion. It sounded like a remix.
Well, were you pleased with it, or do you feel violated by that?
Oh, no, it's wonderful. It was wonderful. The clarity, you can hear the vibraphone, you can hear things, and they're very well placed. Like I said, Night Train to Nashville is excellent. It won the Grammy. They must have had something in mind to have a warmer, more bassy sound.
Well, did they go back to original studio, the original tapes? Were they able to get those out of the vaults and all that?
Yes, they said on the liner notes that, yes, they did.
I see.
In most of the cases where they could get the tapes, they did use them, and I would think they had no problem with Universal, where, Universal has it out on their own disc, so.
Yeah. Well, I know in the case of the stuff I worked with the Library of Congress, I mean, we had the original field discs. They were transferred at the recording laboratory at the Library of Congress, and then from there, I took that material to the mastering, and then we worked with the Cedar, which was a kind of a computer program that works with hisses and pops and noises. It was interesting. A lot of the recording machines, these were called instantaneous acetates. They were being cut right on the spot, and every single person I interviewed, whether it was the performers themselves who were the surviving ones, the few that I was fortunate enough to meet, or those who were their children who witnessed their parents recording, every person talked about this ribbon of acetate sneaking across the floor because it was being cut away at the very moment, they're singing into it. And there's a very heavy stylus arm with the worm gear holding it down, cutting from the inside out. And so when we went to mastering, the machine actually could hear the 60-cycle hum of the machine itself going into the recording stylus. So I was able to get rid of things like that. But always there is, in any endeavor, there's always some kind of give and take. And in audio terms, it's what's called the signal-to-noise ratio, meaning how much sound you have versus how much noise. And if you get rid of all the noise, you tend to get rid of all the signal, too. So you make a compromise, and you figure it out. And the Cedar solution is a kind of was a program that you would ascertain which pops and things to get rid of in sort of cleaning it up, so to speak. But always, one has to take each song as a specific, the recorded performance as a specific world, and probe it accordingly to what its dictates are and what state that acetate or that aluminum disc is in.
Now, Bobby played spoons when he was 12 years old with Papa John Gordy, the honky-tonk piano fellow. Mm-hmm. And these recordings were on Bullet Records. Mm-hmm. So I talked to the fellow who now owns the Bullet catalog, Fred James, and Fred said to me that everything was recorded on aluminum acetates, mm-hmm. and the company disposed of them. Yeah. So there's a track, Mr. McClickety, Mr. McClackety.
Oh.
And well, it's right now it's not on vinyl. We don't think it ever came out, so it might be lost, or maybe someone had the foresight to take that one acetate, and maybe it's somewhere in the universe.
Mr. McClickety, Mr. McClackety, that's worth searching for, Joe. You go find that.
So
great title.
But Bobby is on, he's on wind instruments on Steamboat on Bullet Records with Papa John, and he's playing the spoons on Way Down South and the new Frankie and Johnny. So we actually have him playing spoons with this great honky-tonk piano guy.
That's
and
cool.
His son became a big football quarterback, John Gordy Jr.
I see.
So
that's so great. That's so interesting.
Capturing the history, which was what you do, and
Bob was such a marvelous witness, and I am so grateful to you for acting in this intermediary role that you so generously provided. He's a wonderful part of enrichment to that chapter where I was talking about one of a dozen washboard street bands, and of course his family, as Hebb's Kitchen Cabin Orchestra, were certainly a part of, and so he was providing a window into these essentially largely anonymous musicians whose names we have but little else, and he was a living witness, and his experiences for me provided such an anchor in addition to those that I interviewed who remembered seeing the Nashville Washboard Band and who were truly marvelous. And as you listened to that recording, I'm sure, and that great washboard player, Theophilus Stokes, the blind washboard player with his V8 washboards, attached to a sawhorse, like in a shape of a V. Do you remember that cut with Soldier's Joy?
No. No. But, you know, it's your book, so you can enlighten us, because it's a whole other world for me. And it's hard for me to keep a grasp of everything. I'm so in tune right now with the Papa John Gordy stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to put my mind around much else, even Beatles music these days.
Well, all right. Anyway, if you listen to that track, and it's in the back of the book, and play it on your show sometime, you'll see this incredible merging of art and life that goes on in that recording. Because these are men playing, you know, I mean, objects. They've transformed into musical instruments. I mean, washboards and a lard can bass, and, you know, piece of wire holding it to create the string, the thumping of the string, and that's the timekeeper in the group, and the guitar and the banjo, mandolin, portable instruments that could survive, you know, harsh treatment out on the street, essentially. And these, and in addition to the washboards and lard can bass, that you had a great portability that these men lived in. I went to where their boarding houses were at the time of their recording in 1942, and I did interview someone who was present when they made their recordings, the son of the musicologist John Work III. His son, John Work IV, remembered so clearly when the Nashville Washboard Band dropped by their home on the Fisk University campus and had spent time with his father, and then in July of 1942 made their sole recordings.
Now, there was no one running around with reel-to-reel decks in those days. As you said, it was all acetate. So
Yeah.
all you would have is what people recorded in a studio.
No. These recordings are not made in a studio at all. They're made in the living room of John Work's home. And the recordings that I write about, these are made in farmhouses and in churches and in prisons. They're recorded on portable disc-cutting machines. And portable, I'm putting in quotes, because these machines with their lead-acid storage batteries weighed, you know, several hundred, 500 pounds. They went down in weight as time went on. The Presto Model Y was about, I guess, about 150 pounds or something. But certainly, I'm not to be depended on for these numbers for the weights entirely. But I know that John A. Lomax, for instance, talked about how they had to have a special chassis built in the back of their car to accommodate all this equipment. And I know that you had to be a pretty husky guy to carry it around, this stuff. So these are recordings that are often made beyond the electrical grid. And so on some of the recordings, not these, but on others that I've worked with, the lead-acid storage batteries, the only source of available power, are going down. So the pitch on the records goes up, and you have to recalibrate it to figure out, you know, what the real pitch was when they sang it.
That is so mind-boggling, but it makes a lot of sense.
Luckily, one recordist, Herbert Halpert, down in Mississippi on his trip and other places that he went in the spring of 1939, always blew a pitch pipe before every recording. So we're able to calibrate it according to the pitch pipe, which therefore provides a standard, and you can figure it out quite accurately that way.
And now with computers, it's different from when you did the Rounder release, because years later the computers can actually change the pitch and the timing, correct?
Well, I mean, I think we could do it back when I did in '97 too. I mean, whether, you know, it still has to be manually adjusted because you're going to have to figure out really what is the right speed of this thing. I mean, 78 RPM is not necessarily going at 78 RPM. There's certain questions always in that matter, but you have to figure out, given the data that you have, what the right answer is for each recording. You could set, you know, algorithms and all that sort of thing to have a uniform sound, but whether it's valid is another question. And so that's really the question one asks, not whether it's reliable, but whether it's valid. And those are different ideas. And in the case of each of these recordings, and in all the ones that I've had the privilege of working with, I always had to probe each one, and sometimes there were field notes regarding, you know, whether those batteries had gone down or different things, whether they had a steady source of electricity was always a good thing to know, and that was usually noted. And it's not the most important question to reckon with, but it is important in the audio process. The larger cultural questions is what and historical questions of these songs and these particular creative performers is really where my heart belongs, and where the focus of the book and the center of gravity of the book resides.
And it's interesting because beyond the pitch, you were talking earlier about the pops and the scratches, which, of course, when people made a recording, they didn't think 50 years down the road that it would be, viewed in another light, or that it would pick up pops and scratches.
Well, I don't know about that. I know that at Brunswick Studios in Chicago, which was, making 78s and stuff in the 20s, I mean, they had a microscope right next to the cutting disc turntable. They were looking at the grooves very carefully at that time. So I think there was consciousness. Now, the where that subsequently affects these recordings, or commercial or issued recordings, is another matter, and that's where your pops and scratches come in. But really, there's some really marvelous electrical recordings that were made in the late 20s and so forth. Really, honestly, just great, perfect sound, wonderful sound. I visited a man who recorded Duke Ellington on 78s, and he played me these field recordings he had made in Nebraska. His name was Jack Towers. How could it sound better? I have no idea. It was just wonderful sounding.
Now, these are two separate recordings. You recorded Duke Ellington and you recorded in the field.
These were recordings he made of Duke Ellington in a live concert.
Amazing.
So these are akin to any other, akin to the rural field recordings with which I'm involved.
And so have they preserved something that's that valuable? Duke Ellington. Not all of it is valuable to me as an archive person.
Yes. In good shape. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's amazing. So the Library of Congress, are they very easy to deal with? Or
well, nothing is easy in a sense of they were, those are my, certainly, I mean, I don't know, easy would be the word I'd pick, but certainly wonderful. I mean,
I think they see the greater appeal of a book like this.
Oh, they've been enormously supportive to me. After I began my book there, and then I went on from there. That was just the beginning point. That was where I started, and then I was into the papers and recollections and interviews with collectors. And from there, I really went to the heart of my book, which was in the communities where these recordings occurred, with the families, as well as historical research into comparative versions of the songs. But the heart of my work was going back to and locating the people themselves, not the collectors, not the institutions. Yes, the Library of Congress was great. I mean, they don't take a proprietary interest in this stuff. This stuff belongs to the American people.
Right.
And these performances, belong to the performers. And so that's where the center is for me, and that's the heart of the book. Are those people, those individuals, those you have a common possession, but individual contribution. Common possession, by which I mean, this is a term I'm drawing from Ruth Crawford Seeger. These are folk songs. Many of these songs, many people know in various myriad versions. But you have these individuals who are bringing their own creativity to it, exerting their own understanding of the human condition upon them in that sense. And our artists, are all, each and all, terrific artists. So that's what's going on. What's going on there?
I like that you went to the fans. How did you find fans? You don't find them in the back of Goldmine magazine.
Did you say families?
No, the fans of this music, the people that would be collecting, the collectors. How do you go about finding?
I don't see them as be the primary part. I mean, I started with the collectors, but I don't.
I understand.
Okay.
Oh, no, I understand, but I love the whole idea of collectors just have such insight. And I think they're an important, even if they were at the beginning,
Yeah, they do. They do have insight, and they do have affection and enormous reserves of understanding and comparative knowledge. And God bless the collectors. I worked with particularly worked with a 78 RPM collector out here in Frederick, Maryland, by the name of Joe Buzzard, who's just he has 30 or 40,000 78s in his basement, and he just knows the world of race records and hillbilly records so well. And I was constantly in touch with him, getting comparative other, commercially issued recordings of the same songs that I was studying. He was invaluable, as were other collectors. There's one up in Canada who I worked with very closely as well, who was sending me, things. And there was a label out in Austria where they had put out every single song that's in the listing of this discography printed in United Kingdom of blues and gospel records from the late 1890s up till beginning of World War II. So I was working with discographers and I was working with collectors all the time.
That's extraordinary.
I don't just mean the field collectors, I mean these record collectors.
That is extraordinary.
And they serve as like archivists, like yourself. In other words, they're working with archives are the raw materials, and so they're working with raw materials. Now, I go beyond the artifact in this book. The artifact meaning the recording itself, going beyond where the collectors and the discographers, in a sense, where their work ceases and another work launches in, and that's me in the communities, in these environments, in these physical situations where these people lived, not only where the recordings were made, starting there, but going in those churches and in those prisons and so forth. And I was in all of those places.
And when you found someone that actually made the music, did you bring a tape recorder or did you go and visit them? And how did that come about?
Well, I would, reach people in numerous ways, Joe. There's not one single method, but there were several of the performers who are still alive. And I visited them, and would I have a tape recorder with me? Yes. Would I have a camera with me? Yes. What I wouldn't have with me usually is a band show, because then I'd be playing for them and not listening. So I left that at home. My job was to learn their stories, and whether it was through letter writing or telephone or, a minister leading me to this member of his flock or however it went, there was just lots of ways that I located people. I didn't do it over the internet because that wasn't really a part of it at all. But it involved a lot of driving. I'll tell you.
I would imagine. I mean, the book. It's beautifully laid out. The University of Illinois Press just did a marvelous job.
Yes.
And before you even get to the work cited and the notes, I'm trying to look at the page numbers here.
It's 504 pages in total, including the preface at the beginning, which is in Roman numerals. It's 504 pages. And
how many do you think you had to cut out?
Well, I know how many cut out. When I originally did the manuscript, it was 900 pages long.
Oh, my God.
And I trimmed it down to 600 because nobody wants the New York phone book.
Right.
So, so the manuscript that I turned in, typed, was, at the end of it all, was I trimmed it a third, was 600 pages, and that translates into 504 in typescript.
That is phenomenal. And that's so much work that you did that... isn't out there. Can you eventually put that on the internet or put out a second volume?
Well, I suppose I could put out another volume of work, and when I do academic conferences, I'm able to draw on some of the materials given for a specific chapter. Next, in 2 weeks from now, for instance, I'm going to be near Kentucky doing an event for the family and the community of the fiddler that's in chapter 10 in the book, Luther Strong. So I've been very much central to my work since the book came out is bringing the book back home, showing up in these communities where I did my primary research, and the families are there and fellow community members. And so I will do a presentation there about this particular person, not only relying on what appears in my chapter, but that longer version that I just referred to. So I will take a look at that next couple of days as I begin to write something up to prepare there, and I'll be showing slides and playing and just doing it as many different ways as I can. And this family is so excited, and they're coming in from all parts of the United States. And the mayor of that town has given us the biggest hall in town to do this, which is very kind. And I know he'll be introducing me. And so there I'm able to explore and draw upon the larger or longer, more diffuse kinds of studies that I did before I trimmed the book and edited it.
I hope they videotape these events.
Well, I don't know what means they have to preserve this one coming up in 2 weeks, but I understand what you're saying, and I thank you for saying it.
Well, public access TV to me is the it's kind of like the fly on the wall. As I said, we taped Fritz Richmond, we taped Donald Westlake, the mystery writer, Bobby Hebb, Ray McNally. All these wonderful people have passed on. Ray McNally was a friend of mine who did the In Search of Frankenstein and Dracula books.
Oh.
And he was a professor at Boston University. And I think my show might have been one of the last shows he did. I didn't realize he was dying. And but we'd known each other for decades, and he came on the show. And I'm just so honored that I got Professor McNally in the studio to talk a little bit more about his book. It was about Jekyll and Hyde. What
do you know?
That was his final book.
I'm going to be back in your community. I'm giving a program for the Cambridge Forum on November 13th, Wednesday, November 13th. And I know on Friday that week I go to do a keynote for the Vermont Humanities Council up in Burlington. So maybe during that time I could actually meet you face to face and shake your hand. I've been threatening to do for a long time now, which I'd sure like to do, and meet you face to face.
November 14th, if you're in Cambridge on the 13th, and on the 14th you want to come in here, we're on Thursday nights.
Well, let's plan on it.
That would be a lot of fun.
I'd like that. I'd be honored if I could, do that with you, Joe.
Yeah, and if the music on the CD, it's not copywritten because it's so old, correct?
Well, can you play it on your show? Is that what you're asking?
Right, we're a non-commercial, so we have to be very careful what we play.
Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about. I'm not a lawyer, but
right. I'll check into that, and I'll see that we can.
It's public domain. I know that.
Oh, if it's public domain, we can play it. That's the key word. Two words: public domain.
Yeah. These are folk songs, and they're not. They belong to all of us, the American people. And I beyond that, in terms of performers, I wouldn't worry about that, Joe. You can just play them.
Oh, Susanna, I did an article on John Weiner, who's a mastering engineer in Cambridge, and he had remastered John Philip Sousa's band. Mm-hmm. I think it was around 1899, and so they had he had to remaster it from the Library of Congress. It's just fascinating stuff, what you've done, what people are doing. I think it's so important.
I did a lot of recordings here in Washington, it wasn't for the Library. I assume his recordings reside at the Library of Congress. He was recording for Berliner, who invented the flat disc. And he was recording probably for multiple labels at that time, and which are probably preserved at the library and in their recorded sound division. And these were acoustic recordings. They would say play the same song 20 times in a row as 20 different machines are cutting these things, and it's extremely interesting. And he had a long recording career. There's a lot of good work on Sousa that you could find. I've listened to some of those. Because of my own music playing and my own recording, for instance, of the Under the Double Eagle March, which Sousa had recorded, and I was listening to that when I recorded on Banjo Diary Lessons from Tradition on Smithsonian that came out this September. Also, that was the album that received very surprisingly to me and very happily the Grammy nomination, and
that is impressive, Stephen. Very impressive.
Oh.
I think, and it's a credit to your hard work. How far are you from the Library of Congress?
Oh, just a few miles. I gave a speech there just a few weeks ago, a Botkin lecture. This is a lecture series named after the wonderful and great folklorist Benjamin A. Botkin, and they invited me to give a Botkin lecture, and it was a great experience. It was a real homecoming because you know, as I said, this book began there, and so it was a wonderful experience to speak in that auditorium there, and many of whom were staffers at the American Folk Life Center and so forth, and members of the Recorded Sound Division.
Did you say 15 miles or 50?
No, just a few miles. I'm just a couple miles. I live, you know, I can get there in 25 minutes or something.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Well, that's part of why I live in Washington. I used to live in walking distance of the library. I did for a decade, and I would just walk over there every day. I mean, that was a big resource, a big part of my life, and then as the book got to know itself, as I got to know what I was doing in that book, you know, in a sense, my forays there, you know, lessened because I was in other places in America doing the research that I needed to do to write my book, and going beyond the ambit of the library itself to the locales, because there was a time when the library was not only a vessel to receive documents, but an instrument to create them. And so when they sent out recordists to make these recordings, that's where I went back to at first, and then I went beyond that to wherever those families might have come to live in the years that passed. Because very often for these families, these were just a day in the life. Memory of it had not survived. That many did not know that their parents had made those recordings and such as that. One man who actually made some of those recordings in 1939 said to me, so movingly, he said, "I always knew that day would come to some good." And that was such a sweet thing to say.
Wow.
So, you know, and I'm sitting there in this place with him. You know, he's gone on now, but these moments are moments in time.
Now, not all these artists got to achieve the level of fame Bobby Hebb got, you know, being, 3-4 years old, playing with his mother and father, and then touring with the Beatles. Were there any...
Not many of them had that experience.
Right.
None had that experience. But Bobby Hebb.
So he's like the only person in the book, really, that kind of rose to that level, you'd say?
Well, I haven't thought of it that way. I mean, the people I write about did not have professional careers. None of them. I mean, with the exception of Bobby Hebb, I guess. But some of these performances have permeated our national consciousness. There's no question but that Fiddler Bill Stepp's version of Bonaparte's Retreat, which is the first chapter of the book, that singular performance of that much-played march is what, you know, Aaron Copland used note for note when he did the famous Hoedown and Rodeo. So this nearly anonymous Kentucky fiddler continues to play for millions. This is the same tune that had been transcribed, and it was from that transcription, musical notation, that appeared in 1941 and late 1941 in a book that Copland depended on when he made up his wonderful orchestration of Bill Stepp's singular performance of that tune. And this is what you hear on the Beef It's What's for Dinner commercial. This is what you hear, you know, in Muzak down airport hallways. This is what Emerson, Lake and Palmer had a hit with in the early 70s with our Hoedown. So this is something, this is, Bill Stepp himself did not certainly achieve the fame of anyone comparable at all. I mean, he never even knew this happened, nor did his family. But his piece of music has certainly gone on. And I didn't pick these pieces for their fame, but for their capacity for renewal. But in a number of cases in the book, a number of these songs have reached the national ear. And even if these persons are unknown outside of their families, pretty much, or beyond that of the interest of some record collectors, largely unknown, these performers, not all of them by any means, but we hear their music in myriad ways.
And, you know, Willie Dixon didn't know that his You Need Lovin' became Whole Lotta Love. Of course, when he did, Led Zeppelin had to pay up. But a lot of times, or even Janis Joplin's first major hit, Piece of My Heart, was done by Aretha Franklin's sister, Irma Franklin had a piece of my heart first. So oftentimes, something that the general public hears, Pat Boone, they didn't realize maybe that Pat Boone was taking this music from race records, correct?
Well, I don't know I can't comment on Pat Boone, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, there was often a different version for the pop radio that the general public didn't know that maybe, Johnny Bragg did Just Walking in the Rain, and then Johnny Ray had the hit with it.
Well, I mean, there's a continual transfer always, across genres, and that story certainly permeates the book, where you have a song that, for instance, the chapter of Bobby Hebb in which he appears. I mean, I'm talking about this British-American fiddle tune, perhaps the most widely played fiddle tune in all of the United States, and it was certainly played in Britain constantly. It's also played in northern parts of Europe and Sweden and so forth. Soldier's Joy, and this is a tune that is inflected with African-American sensibility in this particular performance. So you have, and I make the point about, actually in talking about Bobby Hebb, when he said to me that, we listened to bluegrass in the morning and Walter Winchell at night, what he was explaining to me and saying that was both, cultural sharing and cultural specificity. He brought certain ideas to this music, and then he also brought larger ideas. It sort of characterized his art. Wouldn't you say so, Joe?
I think that he's a great indicator of how important having this kind of a background was to come out with a really important art with a foundation that many major artists do not have. Does that answer your question?
No, I mean, he was certainly, he was so informed on so many levels, with African-American tradition, with jazz music, with pop. I mean, it just goes on and on in his case. It's an extraordinary orchestra of American music that he possessed, and then turned to his own, subjected through the filter of his own artistic vision. And it seems to me that he's enormously emblematic of a wonderful diffuseness and fusion both at the same time. And I love that about thinking about him and what he provides us all.
I think your book shows us the raw ingredients of the importance of this foundation of just pure musicality. That later music became a huge industry, but this was the real seeds, if you will. And it's vitally important, and I really thank you for doing this real labor of love.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm grateful for your comments. When people in America, whether even they live in the remotest rural, for everyone, they were hearing in some form or another, whether it was direct or through secondary sources, things that were being transmitted on the airways or were being committed to wax, just as much as they were providing materials that get recommitted to wax and then rebroadcast over the air. And it's this constant interplay of the local and the national, the personal and manufactured, or the personal and the historical. That's this dialectic is always going on in this book, and it's going on with these people. Again, common possession, individual contribution. There's a lot of ways to put this, the official and the informal, between these people and the federal government via the cultural agency of the Library of Congress, the nation's oldest cultural agency. So there's a lot of these dualisms that are going on here, and it speaks to this great complexity that defines us and diversity that we draw upon. And these individuals have made a difference in our democracy. They have contributed, and they are lives that, these were not people who made this their careers. This is part of their daily life. This is their recreation. This is something that mattered to them, and something they were all very, very good at.
The book is called The Beautiful Music All Around Us, Field Recordings and the American Experience. Like the Oracle in the Matrix says, Stephen, our time is up.
All right.
But I would love to see you here in studio November 14th. I'll put it tentatively on our calendar.
Oh, put it. Don't write it down and keep it. That's I got it. It's there.
All right, Stephen Wade. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
That's Stephen Wade. And now, of course, it's time for Frank Dell'Estrito. And we need 10 hours to do this show.
The correct number you have called is no longer in.
Of course. What I did, people, I just mixed up both numbers. That's called crazy dyslexia. I don't have dyslexia. I just became dyslexic for a second.
Frank Dell'Estrito, talking about movies.
Hello, Frank. How are you?
All right, how are you?
Good. What's the movie a week from tomorrow?
Movie a week from tomorrow is the last of Frank Baum's Oz films called The Magic Cloak of Oz.
The Magic Cloak of Oz.
Yes, and it's not a long film. There's plenty of plot, and one of the plot elements is a magic coat, which confers its owner with some wishes. There's also a 683-year-old witch running around.
Only 683.
Only 683. There's near the end of the movie, the land of Oz is invaded by something called the Roly Rogues, who look like an army of Tweedledum and Tweedledees. And, of course, the usual menagerie of animals that are smarter than most of the people. So add it all up, it's a lot of plot for a movie that's not even an hour long.
And as it was the conclusion of the 4 or 5 or 6 movies, I don't know the exact number because some have been lost in time, right?
Yeah. Well, L. Frank Baum formed the Oz Film Company and made 3 Oz movies. But they were also, as I think I told you, they're pretty fast and loose with the copyright laws in those days. So there were other Oz movies, and I think it's tomorrow night you're showing a short 1910 film, which is the oldest surviving Oz film, but it's not the first Oz film ever made. It's just the oldest one that we have a copy of. Then L. Frank Baum formed his company, made 3 Oz films. None of them were very successful, so he kind of hung on, and then after this movie he gave up. So it's not like he completed a series. It's more or less he just had to move on. And then if you want to stick with the Oz theme, we can have a full-length silent version of The Wizard of Oz made in 1925, which L. Frank Baum had nothing to do with other than supplying the original story, because he dies in 1919, the age, well, just short of 63, a few days short of his 63rd birthday.
Oh, I'll track it down. 1925 Oz, I did not know.
1925, public domain from as far as I know, and it's notable mainly for a younger and a bit slimmer Oliver Hardy playing the Tin Man. He hasn't met Stan Laurel yet. And so we'll talk about that next week. Tonight's, well, the movies you've been showing for the Oz series. So you showed the first one last week. You're showing the second one tomorrow night, as well as the 1910, which is a much shorter film. And you're showing the last of The Magic Cloak of Oz next week. They pretty much have the same cast. And for the third week in a row, I'm going to say how much I admire Frank Woodward, who plays Nicodemus the Mule in a mule outfit, does the whole movie on all fours. Does what we might consider today an obscene gesture.
Okay.
He does that in tomorrow night's film and in next week's film. So yeah, keep your eyes open for that. And again, it has Mildred Harris, whose main claim to fame is being the first Mrs. and the first ex-Mrs. Charlie Chaplin, winning one of the biggest divorce settlements in the United States up until then. She's 13 in this movie, 1914, so she meets Chaplin when she's 16. She marries him when she's 18. He divorces him, or he divorces her. I don't think anybody was happy when she's still in her teens, I think. So that's her claim to fame. And
A Kardashian divorce. How
yeah,
nice.
Yeah, quick. And in those days, making it quick was not easy.
And we've got to cut it short now, Frank. Sorry.
I'll talk to you next week, Joe.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The views and opinions on Visual Radio are those of the host and his guests. Poor Frank, I cut him short, but not necessarily those of WinCam, staff, management, board of directors, members, viewers. Thank you, viewers at Winchester, wincam.org. Go to visual-radio.net, visualradiolive.blogspot.com. Thank you, Judy Kelman. Thank you, Director Jay Gold. Good night.